Done? Ready? Hi friends, welcome back. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. Welcome back. This is Veda again here. So we have another lovely speaker for this evening, Ian Cunningham from the UK. I shall introduce him and then we'll start the session with him. So Ian is Chair of Governors of Self-Management Learning College in Brighton, UK. SML College is a unique organization that supports young people aged 9 to 16 in managing their own learning. The college provides a learning community that enables young people to learn to lead a good life. There are no classrooms. There is no formal teaching. Each student creates their own curriculum and writes their own timetable. In addition to this main work, Ian is a dancer, member of 3 score dance companies since 2011, welder and metal sculptor, organization development consultant for 40 years, writer. He has written 7 books and over 100 published articles and papers. He is company director since 1984, self-managed learning college not only supports young people in the Brighton area, but also assists others to develop the approach to learning. Ian has worked with schools and community organizations throughout the UK, as well as in Australia, Canada, Chile, China, Finland, Greece, Hungary, Israel, Korea, Puerto Rico, and Sweden. So today he is amongst us to talk about the need for a new educational paradigm and the case of managed learning as part of this. He has recently published a book, so you can check his book to learn more. In his book, he says that the existing educational paradigm does not stand up to scrutiny. It is maintained by those in power who do not accept the manifest evidence of the failures of the current system. We have to present the evidence that there is a new educational paradigm with the global development of the kind of work that we have all been doing. A better approach that responds to the real needs of young people is here already, and it's working. Our own contribution to this is our self-managed learning college, which has proved that we don't need classrooms, imposed curricula, and adult-imposed rules. Young people need to be free to learn what they want, how they want, when they want, and why they want to learn. Let's listen to Ian Cunningham and develop his conference for this evening. Let's welcome Ian Cunningham. Ian Cunningham, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got a presentation which should take a while and then allow us plenty of time for question and answer. If I can try and get myself a speaker view. I've got a presentation worked out, which I'll try and get on the screen. If you're allowing me screen share, are you, Veda?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so if I can share that. Oh, I need to do that. I can't see it, but let me try this. Is that visible to people? Just
yes.
Oh, right. Okay. So let me do this. Security alert, go away. Right, I've got an agenda. So I'm going to do an introduction, then go through what I'm saying is evidence-based flaws in the current schooling paradigm, which I'm going to whiz through quickly because I think it's quite well known. I've got a bit about comparing what was the current schooling paradigm with what I'm calling a new paradigm. and then just mentioning what we do as one approach within that paradigm. I'm not saying it's the approach, just an example of an approach to exemplify the paradigm. I've got, hopefully I can make it work, a short film on a couple of schools with some comments from young people. And then there's some contact information, and we'll have a question and comment session. So that should work reasonably well. So that's me. The company I chair is Strategic Developments International, which is where we do work with organizations and where we've done self-managed learning and other kind of person-centered approaches for the last more than 40 years. And it's only in the last 20 years been working with young people. So the college is part of what we call a charity, the Centre for Self-Managed Learning, which is based in the UK, but which we work internationally with anybody interested in working with us. And that centre is not just for working with young people, but also across generations. So I used to say that what we do, age range is 7 to 70, but since I'm 77 now, that doesn't work. So we now say 7 to 107 as our age range. One reason for that extended age range, just to say why it's not just, doesn't sound silly, is that there was an interesting program on the television about a project that went for just 4 months, where a group of academics, 4-year-old children from primary school, spent time with older people in a home for the elderly. And it was just a 4-month time period. One of the people in the home was a woman of 104. And what they did, the academics did, was to give people tests before the program on physical and mental ability. They did this with both the 4-year-olds and the older people. At the end of 4 months, it's not surprising to learn that the 4-year-olds were leaping ahead in terms of their both cognitive and physical development. But what was interesting for me was that the 104-year-old woman had also improved both her cognitive ability and her physical ability in that time, in just 4 months. The crazy thing about the project is they stopped it after 4 months, because it's fairly obvious that something like that, where there was no teaching, where it was just interactive between people of different generations, had such a marked positive effect without a curriculum, without imposed teaching, without anything. Just the opportunity for these people to interact made that amount of change. So we've run programs from age 7 upwards in schools, and our current college is for 9+, which is why we say start at 7. I think before 7 it should be just play, and we shouldn't organize anything. So that's a bit about me. But one of the bits I want to put in would be that you mentioned about dance, Veda, and we did a project with a professional company. And if I can make this film work, and if it doesn't, then I'll find another way of explaining it. I did the closing duet with one of the professional company, and I'm hopeful I can make it work so that you can just see it. The sound is pretty awful, but hopefully you get the idea of it if I make this work. It looks as though somebody's been writing on the screen, Veda. Is that it? There must be a sort of whiteboard option that somebody's taken up.
Okay, I'll just.
Because there's a blue, I've got blue marks on the screen. Have you? Can you see them?
Yeah, I can see blue mark. Yeah.
Yeah. So just take it on from there. So the reason for showing that, it wasn't particularly to show off, although you must know that, or at least I won't tell you, that I'm 50 years older than the person I was dancing with. 2 years ago, I was 75 at the time and she was 25. It's more about the notion of learning and learning at any age and how we learn, because I knew nothing about contemporary dance about 10 years ago when I joined the company. I didn't know how it worked or anything. I just knew I liked to move, and so joined the company. And then we've done all sorts of things, and I've danced in all sorts of locations around the country now, working with other companies. One of the things, the selection process for joining our company was twofold. One was you had to be able to dance okay-ish, but more importantly, you had to be able to be part of a company. In other words, get on with other people. So one of the interesting things that seems to me important in education is the notion that it isn't just about independent or interdependent learning. It is about being able to engage with other people. In that particular case, the professional dancer Charlie and I created that duet, which does go on a little bit. It was the closing duet for the piece. And that meant us being able to get on and engage. And we've had people who have come for audition to the company, and we've clearly rejected them because, having spent a morning with us, it's clear that they don't engage well with other people and they're not as tolerant as they might be. And of course, the origin of company is Latin companis, breaking bread together. And it's that whole notion of a company is about people engaging with each other, not in a trivial kind of way, but in some kind of depth way, like the notion of eating together is, I think, kind of profound and important thing that we do as humans. And it isn't just eating, of course, it is about the connections with people. So there are a number of dimensions to that piece, but one of them was to try and say something about the age piece. I'll focus a little bit more on schooling today because that's the nature of the IDEC. But I want to mention some of the research that we've done and to get you to do something, because I don't want to talk the whole time. And I've got another film anyway later on. But I wanted to mention the research that we've done in organizations, because that's where I've spent most of my life. I've worked with senior leaders across all sorts of organizations, most of the largest companies in the UK. We've worked with British Civil Service, and we've worked with large international companies. Most recently, I've just been working with Nike for 5 years, developing senior leaders across the globe. And we use the same process we do with them as we do with our 9-year-olds. There's no difference. But one of the bases of our research was to go into organizations and do various things like, so we asked people about what the purpose and vision of their place was, why they existed, what the mission, strategy, policies, principles, didn't really matter. And then if I was working with a board of directors, I'd ask them what their role was in achieving that. What did they do that made them effective in doing that? So therefore, what I wanted to know was what capabilities, qualities, skills, knowledge, ability, it doesn't really matter what label you use, that there are things that make you be able to do that job. And I was explaining to them that they're all directors of a significant international company, therefore they must be good at that, and therefore tell me what they were good at, and they would tell me some of that. And I'd like to, and one of the things I do when parents come on open days is ask them the same, this third question about, well, what are you good at? So I'd like, if everybody thought about, well, what are you good at? That could be in parenting, it could be in work, it could be in sport, it could be anything, hobbies, anything that you do. What are you good at? What are those qualities or skills or knowledge? Capabilities is a word I like, but it doesn't really matter what language you use. I'd like you to think about some things that you're good at. And I know certainly in England, because we're told to be very humble about ourselves and not boast. So I have to encourage people to be a little boastful and tell me things that they're good at, even though, of course, our culture says that you're not supposed to say you're good at things. So having thought a bit about that, what I'd like to do is to say, well, how come you can do those things? How is it that you are able to do whatever you put down on a piece of paper or had in your head? And there are really only three possibilities, I think. Either it's genetic, you were born with it, or you've learned it over time, or there's some physical change that you've gone through over time. We get better at, say, sport as we get older through the teens, and then as we get really old, like myself, you're not as good physically and strong as you used to be when you're younger. So the physical change impacts on things we can do. But I'd like to find out from you. I'd like some people just give me an example, because I just need a bit. This is replicating our research, but in a very kind of trivial way. But it is something, as I say, that I use with parents and young people and the children who come to see us, to tell us about what is it they're good at and how can they do it. So I just need some volunteers, please. Just one thing. All I need is one thing from a number of people. I normally have a flip chart, but I can't, so I'm going to write it down here. And since you don't need to own up to it, and I'm not going to do anything with this information, who cares?
Ian, perhaps you can repeat what exactly you're asking for. Are you asking us to identify our three capabilities?
What are you good at?
Yeah, so I put in the chat, I am creative.
Right, okay. And how come you are creative? Where did that come from?
Well, I only discovered I was creative at 50. That's a whole other story. But I am creative because I embrace opportunities to explore new ideas.
Okay, great. Okay. And how come you're able to embrace opportunities? I mean, where did that come from? Is it genetic, or did you learn it?
I actually had to unlearn that I wasn't.
Right, yeah, okay. So it's a process of unlearning. Okay, so that's a good example. Being creative and how you came to be creative. I just like a few more examples, if people don't mind. Is it clear? It's just something you're good at, anything. And then how is it that you're good at it? Where did it come from? Is it genetic? Did you learn it?
You can be on the mic, all the friends. You can just turn on your mic and just
Can I jump in maybe?
Please.
So I recently found out that I'm good at learning languages.
Right.
And that really surprised me, because I was really bad at languages in school, which, you know, when I learned more about education and schooling, that didn't really surprise me, that I didn't really learn much in school. But I don't have a good answer of why am I good in languages. So I was hoping you might be able to help me.
So I'm interested, obviously, if you didn't show those abilities in school, then how is it you've learned it since school? Is the interesting question. And maybe you can't answer it right now, because when we've done this exercise, we've spent an hour or two with people asking them about what they're able to do and then how come they can do it. So it can often take some time to unpack that. The most often example we're given is experience. So when we say, somebody might say, I'm good at organizing, and how did you do that? Well, through experience, but then we need to unpack or find out what experience means. So,
right.
yeah, okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
I've got a good one, Ian.
Please.
This is Thomas Sudbury.
Yeah.
I'm going to say I'm good at being a social butterfly.
Okay. And how is it you do that?
That's a story. I would say, but extremely short. But at age 45, I became desperate to live life at a higher level. And I, as a computer programmer, understood how to keep it simple. So I learned how to lose my fears. I learned how to let go of the future. I learned how to stay in the moment and make the most of the moment. I took on a motto of it's laughter I'm after. And all this took like 6 months and longer, right? I had to practice every day how to do it. And eventually it took me to a place where I was able to help everybody around me have a lot more fun and laughter in our interactions. But it was just an empirical process of learning and losing my fears and just trying stuff and seeing what happened.
Great, thank you. Great example. Okay, really, there's 3 good examples. Somebody else, doesn't matter how.
I have a go.
Yeah.
Jerry,
Who is me? So I'm good at singing, and I'm good at leading people in song. You know, and connecting with people and through music.
Yeah. And how you're able to do that?
Well, 2 things. Well, the singing part is because I grew up with a very musical mother who sang a lot, and I kind of grew up under her piano while she was practicing singing. So I had a relationship with music from very early, and with singing in particular. And I love people, and I realized that people are having, you know, it's good to connect through music because people are having fun together. So that's something I experienced over time, the power of singing and bringing people together.
Right. Okay. One more example at the very least. Yeah, Jerry.
Can I come in?
Oh, yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Srinivas Kumar Irrapotu, shortly Sky. And my strengths are connecting with people and collaborating with people.
And how is it you're able to do that?
Well, the root causes, I was observing quite a good number of holes and gaps in things. So then I felt that the process of connecting with people and collaborations, healthy collaborations would be the answer. And now I'm extensively and professionally doing that.
Right.
Can I give you a couple, Ian?
Yeah, go on then. And then that's helpful. And then Jerry, please.
Oh,
go. Yeah, Jerry, then Jerry.
I'll give you 2. Can we have quite good things without?
Yeah, sure.
Because I've got the English problem. I can only be quite good at something. So I'm sort of quite good at jazz piano, and I'm quite good at annoying people in authority.
Yeah.
Now, one of those I learned in school. Guess which?
Annoying authority?
Well, it could be.
I don't know. Which did you learn in school?
Yeah, I learned in school that I was good at annoying people with authority.
Right, okay. And the jazz piano you learned after school?
I learned it despite my formal music education, which didn't get very far. But I learned it completely informally with a friend's dad, who is a really brilliant jazz guitarist.
Great. Can I take Jerry, and then we leave it at that? Jerry, you got one?
Hi, Ian. I heard that you're just as young as I am. Wow. Well, so to me, the biggest influence on my direction was my grandfather. And it was very simple. When I was quite a young kid, I would come visit him in Boston. My family would go there, and he would sit down with me. He was a brilliant man. He was an expert on Shakespeare. He was an author. He was a judge and a lawyer. And he would say to me, "So, what do you want to learn?" And so to me, you see, that was what influenced the paradigm that I thought should be used in learning for the rest of my life. Yeah. And I think it made me start pursuing things that I was interested in, and confident that I could get things going and start things. And so from a pretty young age, I was organizing my friends into discussion groups and teaching tennis at that early. I used that as a way of making extra money after college and so on. And so that's why I think I've continued in that direction, feeling that I can easily organize things whenever I want.
Great. Okay, I don't want to prolong this because obviously we need to move on, but hopefully everybody could reflect on what they've written down. And from our research with senior leaders, professionals, all sorts of roles, by and large, school, college, university, training courses contributes very little to them in their life now, very little. The maximum would be 10 to 20%. And that all the examples you mentioned, including Derry's learning to annoy people in authority, is obviously a reaction to the curriculum rather than what's on the curriculum. School, college, university, training courses, all of that whole panoply that trillions are spent on every year is wasted because people get very little from it. And in many cases, people learn things that put them off future learning. We have students who come to us and tell us that I'm no good at maths because they've been badly taught maths. I'm sure Derry would know. We have people who say I'm no good at music. We had a boy who I remember in the first year we were operating said, well, I tried to learn the cello and it was hopeless, and so I'm no good at music. And our music person, adult, said, well, you know, he was interested in music, so would you like to try some chords on this guitar? And then gradually, by the end of the time he was with us, he could play 5 instruments, and he went on to get a degree in music. So even if people learn things within school, it's sometimes the wrong thing. And this is, I think, pretty terrifying. The interesting thing is, of course, that because our work has been with adults and we research on older adults, that schools don't do that. Schools don't follow up from school. They measure their results by exam passes and other criteria, but there's very little follow-up, certainly in England, and I can only talk in detail about England, but in other countries I visited, I experienced the same thing. And this leads into this whole notion of a paradigm, because what it is that the schooling paradigm is about making better something that is already not working. It's like trying to make a better stagecoach when we've got buses and trains invented. What people are doing is trying to improve a 19th century model. Because, of course, people in power can carry on doing this, they're able to carry on doing it. So one downside of invoking the idea of a paradigm is that in science isn't democratic, or if you can't show that the existing paradigm works, it can be replaced. I remember in my first year at university in 1961, we had someone came to our chemistry society talking about the steady state view of the universe, and that therefore all the research was fitting that. And of course, gradually other research proved that this didn't quite work, and now we have the Big Bang theory. But at that particular time, the dominant paradigm was the steady state, and it fitted a kind of religious view of God had created the universe as it is. And so there was a lot of if you like, stuff behind it that was supporting that, just as there is with the schooling paradigm. So what we have is propping up of a system that demonstrably doesn't work, that if anybody looked at this research evidence, and while we've done the research and it's published in our Handbook of Work-Based Learning and in other places, there's research by Sussex University, Hull, Lancaster, Centre for Creative Leadership in the USA. All the research on adults and their learning shows that school, college, university courses and all that stuff is by and large useless for much of what makes a person a good human being, because that's what we think is what we're about. So let's kind of try and move on this one if I can. So just the school paradigm is you want to teach children subjects in order for them to pass tests. That's the dominant mode. Our view is, first of all, assisting, so it's not teaching. I used to have a card which said learning assistant on it, and gradually my colleagues have told me that I should have one that looks more professional than that, and especially as the notion of assistant is pretty low level. So, but I still think we're there to assist, to process and not teach. Secondly, there's a whole lot of things you can do to people who aren't adults or human beings that you can't do to human beings. So the notion of having a separate category for a group of people in our society called children allows things to be done to them that cannot be done to persons. So I prefer to talk about young people, although I know in writing I have to accept the word child, and I may use that term today, or kid, which of course comes from being a young goat, and our students are young goats, I guess. But the language we use is a dominant language. Another thing that's kind of interesting in England is the notion of the word special. In normal parlance, somebody who is special is special. You say the person is special person, that they're good at sport or whatever. Special in education means you're not special. It means you are a subhuman being who can be treated badly, and there's been a number of scandals of young people classified with learning problems where they have been locked up and mistreated. And so we have some of these terrifying situations which would not be allowed, of course, with adults once you're over 18, because you have some rights then. And then we want people to learn, and all of them to lead a good life. And we're not interested in the passing of tests unless they help you to lead a good life. And if they do, then you do them. And if you don't, you don't. There's a lot could be said about what makes a good life, but we're very clear that we want to talk to students about who you want to be in the future, what kind of person, what would a good life constitute, what would it mean, in order, before we do anything else, to try and find out about them and what things that they value and what do they believe in. So here's a few random issues which I guess that pretty well everybody here would know about, but which I can at least go through to show that there is no basis for the current model of schooling. First of all, what is taught doesn't equal what is learned. If teaching worked, then everybody would learn everything and get 100% in every test, and clearly it doesn't work. I'm sometimes challenged in presentations by, well, what about literacy? Shouldn't people be taught language? I'm going, well, yes, but it's interesting that Britain has, for its population, the largest prison population in Western Europe, and more than 50% of those in prison are functionally illiterate, and yet at least 99% of them will have been to school and taught English. But school English is not the same as literacy. Learning to analyze a Shakespeare play is not the same as being able to write a CV with no grammatical and spelling errors, which is my judgment of what makes someone literate. And the passing of English tests does not. It was fascinating. I had a 10-year-old who last year who'd come to us from school. So, and 10-year-olds in England have to know about grammatical forms in English. So we asked him about what they're good at, not good at, and things like that. And he said, I'm not good at English. So I asked him about, did he read? Yes, he'd read all the Harry Potter books. He could clearly write because he'd been writing things that were reasonably well written. And what he meant was school English, which meant that he had to know grammatical forms. Like a 10-year-old is expected to know what ellipsis is. I didn't know what ellipsis is until I looked, till 2 years ago, when I had to look at the curriculum for 10-year-olds. It's kind of amusing, when I was writing my book, that I spoke into a microphone, and whenever I said the word ellipsis, it would produce an ellipsis on the page. It's madness. So the curriculum is totally subjective. There's no objective basis to any curriculum at all. It is a purely subjective choice. Why is it in the UK we have different curricula for England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland? Are these children so different? An English child in Scotland does the Scottish curriculum. A Scottish child in England does the English curriculum. But what's that about? Madness. All people are different, and yet school imagines there's similarities, but we actually should encourage this difference. We know in organizations that work best, teams that work best are ones with difference. If you put a group of high ability people together in a team, in an organization, they will perform badly, because what you need is different. You need different perspectives, different experience, different ways of thinking to make a team effective. A football team with 11 goalkeepers wouldn't win much. or a cricket team with 11 wicket keepers. It's madness to actually suppress difference. And it's not about tolerating difference, it's about encouraging difference. Actually welcoming the fact that people are different and encouraging them to be different. Because there is no such thing as an average child. The research on this actually was in the US Air Force, where they built the cockpits of these planes to an average male. So leg length, average length of arm, average size of head, average body, etc. And they had a lot of accidents. And then they found that there was no average pilot out of, I think it was over 4,000 pilots, and not one conformed to the average, not a single one. And it will be the same in a classroom. If you want to talk about an average child, and then see if that child exists in the classroom, they don't. I guarantee it. And there's wonderful literature on that. We found at least 57 ways that young people can learn, at least 57. We stopped at 57 varieties because of the kinds and things, of which the classroom is only one. Our students can choose any variety, any mode of learning they want, and no one in 20 years has asked us to recreate the classroom, never once, and they have complete freedom of choice. We will create whatever our students ask for. Employers' views. Working not just I've worked globally with organizations, and their continual criticism that education is failing to meet the needs of the world of work, that what organizations want are people who are good team players, people who are creative, people who are able to be self-managing, self-disciplined, etc. And the academic world encourages the opposite. The environment of work is changing. Artificial intelligence is here. It's replacing jobs. We're in a new kind of environment. And what is being required more and more is ability to be creative and innovative and thoughtful and work in harmony with other people more effectively. That it's here and now, that world. And it's fascinating that Britain, and I know other countries as well, have got this mania for what's called STEM subjects: science, technology, engineering, maths. Well, a lot of the jobs that exist in that world are already vulnerable, and in the next few years will disappear with artificial intelligence, as no question. The biggest expansion of the UK economy is in the digital and creative sectors, by far. We've never been good at manufacturing and all the things that we've pretended to be good at, but what we're pretty good at is being innovative. And other cultures are realizing that that's an requirement of the new world. In our local area in Sussex, there's a report done by the two local universities, Sussex and Brighton, on what was happening in the digital sector. And there's this fusion of the ability to work digitally and also work creatively. And I was talking to one of the managing directors of a local company, and he said, well, I've got 40 employees. If I could find 40 more, I could double my business. I can't find one. The week before, I'd sat in a meeting with people who'd left university with first-class honours degrees from top universities, saying they couldn't find work. It's a madness. We are conning, we are lying to young people as adults by pretending that the kind of work that's going to be available in the future is what has been available in the past, and it won't be. And it isn't already. It's already, that world is already changing. We no need to talk about democracy, except that it was interesting in the previous talk that I was listening to, that of course democracy has a bad label for it because of the distortions of it that we see in our country and in other countries as well. And paradoxically, we don't talk about our college being democratic, but I can come on to that in discussion if people want to. Some are born in England. The academic year is from the 1st of September to the 31st of August. So what happens is that children who are born in June, July and August do worse academically. The government's own report 10 years ago showed that summer-born children drop at least one grade in our general certificate of secondary education, the 16+ exam. And the fact they don't take it at 16, of course, those born in the summer are taking it at age 15. So it's a lie to say it's a 16-year-old exam, because it isn't. And also summer-born children are less likely to go on to university and by a huge significant margin. It's not a trivial issue. I know that in other countries, their academic year starts, say, in the 1st of January, in which case then the children who are born in October, November and December are discriminated against. And those structural discriminatory factors are endemic in all of the educational systems that I know of, where these kind of discriminatory practices are just institutionalized and just accepted. In fact, the government had done its own report on this, and then the only thing in the document was some notion of, well, it may be more personalized, but then that was all they said, and it taking us anywhere. Size matters. I'm with the anthropologists and Robin Dunbar at Oxford and paper like this. 150 is the maximum that any person can know well. The hunter-gatherer bands, by and large, are much smaller than 150. Robin Dunbar claims that there's nobody has a personal Christmas card list more than 150. So even when people say it's a small school and then they've got 400 or 500, I don't see it is. We do know that size matters and that relationships between people are more effective where there are a small size and where people can get on. But size on its own is not a factor. You can have very authoritarian small schools. Bullying and violence. This is seen as, again, across cultures, bullying in schools. And it is well known that this has long-term impacts, but schools treat it as part of collateral damage. For instance, research done in the UK shows that someone who has been badly bullied in school is 3 times more likely to have psychosis in adult life. That you find a demonstrable impact on at the age of 50 from people when they've studied early bullying. It may not be, of course, in school, but schools themselves encourage that kind of style of working. Longevity. One of the things I'm interested in is the difference between people who have an external locus of control, that is, they believe other people can do things for you, as opposed to an internal locus, meaning I can take charge of my life, I am a self-managing person, I'm autonomous. And that's one of the differences in terms of longevity from some of the research. The more autonomous and the more socially connected, so it's links to this notion right at the bottom of the independent and interdependent dimensions, leads to longer life. Mental health. We know schools cause mental health problems, and it's kind of bizarre in England at the moment because of COVID that people are saying we've got to get the children back in school to solve mental health problems when schools are causing them. When people study future life satisfaction, happiness, for instance, there's no correlation between exam grades and future life satisfaction and fulfillment, happiness, meaning in life. What does correlate is well-being in those crucial years, usually in the teens. Learning is not just one process. That is what a lot of people would use the verb to learn when they mean quite different things. To learn, say, I had to learn that the bus timetable had changed recently. Well, that's quite trivial learning. Whereas learning to be self-confident, learning to take charge of your own life, learning that internal sense is quite a different process and is not actually anything to do with more and more subject learning. Lifelong learning is not lifelong going on courses. And this notion of moving from the flip-flop of young people either will conform or obedient or counter-dependent, that is, rebel and end up in prison or something like that. And that's not, counter-dependence is not independence or interdependence. It is not learning to be yourself when you are merely reacting against the authorities. That is not what I'm talking about. And just as an example of interdependence, death rates after emergency surgery fall by 275 per 100,000 patients for every extra 25% of hospital staff who work in teams. That there's huge amounts of research in the National Health Service in the UK that better collaboration and people getting on better in a hospital reduces death rates. And the other side of it is that hospitals kill people because people have not learned how to get on with other people. And so these are not trivial issues as far as I'm concerned, they're extremely serious. So I've summarized, and I don't want to spend too long on this. a difference between the traditional schooling paradigm and the new educational paradigm that I'm calling. And I'm saying that what binds people here are as that right-hand side, that learning is anywhere, not in institutions, that young people can actually learn how to learn unless they've been, if you like, educated in a way that says they must depend on others, and school can do that to people. It can encourage that obedience and dependence. That freedom in the curriculum, that the learner's role, not having imposed timetables, joint decision making, and that students choose if they want to take tests or not. Informal versus formal relationships. In our case, it's all first name terms. And when we go into school, which I'll mention in a minute, it's quite interesting because when we work with young people in school, we do still work on first name terms, because when we do is go on into school and do things, we say these are our non-negotiables, one of which is that informality. Notion of progression is a nonsense. It's in English schools, there is this notion of there should be certain progress after year. People who've done the research show it doesn't work that way at all. Learning doesn't go at a steady pace. Interesting, the examples that people gave earlier of important learning occurring in adulthood. It's not a natural process of just adding 1 year onto the next and everything gets better. It doesn't. Dress code. I just came across a report from a local newspaper where a boy had been sent home from school because his hair was too short. I mean, this is just mad, you know. I mean, we used to get in trouble because our hair was too long when I was at school, but dress code is just, and of course it's incredibly racist. Afro-Caribbean, especially girls with large haircuts, have been discriminated against and suspended from school. It's dreadful. This next one about access, when we ask students after they've been with us for a week or two how they find the difference, often they say, well, it's just great that I can go to the toilet when I want, or it's great that I can go into the kitchen and help myself to food when I want. We tended to see that as relatively trivial. The students don't. They actually think that is an important symbol of their right, as they would have at home. If they want to go to the toilet, presumably they're allowed to go to the toilet. If they want to go and get a drink, they're presumably allowed to get a drink. Notion of lifelong learning, and who can memorize facts are better people than not, whereas everyone is important, and it forgets about the sort of moral dimension of schooling. I just want to read you, it's a very well-known statement sent by a survivor from a concentration camp to teachers, because this is relevant, I think, to this. So here's his statement. I am a survivor of a concentration camp. My eyes saw what no person should witness: gas chambers built by learned engineers, children poisoned by educated physicians, infants killed by trained nurses, women and babies shot by high school and college graduates. So I'm suspicious of education. My request is this: help your children become human. Your efforts must never produce learned monsters, skilled psychopaths, or educated Eichmanns. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are important only if they serve to make our children more human. And I can remember that notion of a kind of morality. A girl coming to us from school who was diagnosed as having all sorts of learning difficulties, and she said, when asked about what she did and anything she was good at, she said no, she wasn't good at anything, and she meant it. Though nicely, I found out that she danced and went to dance competitions. But more importantly, she was a kind of moral compass often within the community. She'd be the one who'd call it out if there were any issues about people being, well, for instance, drug taking would be a good example. Both her parents were alcoholics, so she had a pretty strong notion about substance abuse, and would call it. And she was someone who couldn't do basic arithmetic and had real difficulty in reading and writing, but she left with a level of literacy, but more she left with her humanness intact and her acknowledgement of who she was. So what I think school does is to say we're going to teach people skills or solutions to problems they haven't thought about, mainly subjects, specializations and systems. Whereas what we should do and what we attempt to do, and I think is part of this paradigm, is you start with the person, what problems they have, what processes they use for thinking, what patterns that they have. And one of the problems that we have, I think, is the notion in school that all learning is additive. That is, we must add things in. And the model of a human being is of an empty bucket, except that it's a leaky bucket, so we have to have top-up courses. Whereas a lot of learning is about changing habits. For instance, if someone is going to become more self-confident, that means changing ways of being in a different kind of way, and it's nothing to do with adding new stuff generally, but rather how people reframe or reorganize often the skills and abilities they have. And of course, the problem we have with parents and young people sometimes is that those changes don't seem like education because it's not adding new stuff. When someone has suddenly realized that they can take charge of their own life and have become more autonomous and offered more within the community, that's a change of their behavioral patterns, but it is not necessarily adding new things. One last thing before I try and move on to some more stuff about schools is the example of Coco. I can give her name because she was in the local papers. When she came to us, she was pretty much pushed out of school. She was told that she was not really learning because she was doodling all the time. She was diagnosed with OCD and with ADHD and with dyslexia. So she came with this baggage. And her first year with us, she basically sat and drew cartoon figures and made funny little figures out of plasticine. That was when she was 13. When she was 15, she had written a graphic novel that has sold well. It's been out on Amazon. And she also had taken a law exam for when she was in what was called year 10, meaning a year before they normally take those exams. And she commented to the local paper when they asked her about taking a law exam. She said, well, I learned visually, so I had to draw stick men with speech bubbles for barristers and solicitors. Those are the two distinctions in the English legal system. So she was having to learn in that kind of way, which she could do. But I remember I didn't normally work with her much, but I happened to be talking to her about learning her law for a law exam, which she was just learning out of a book because we don't have any lawyers in our staff team. So I said, well, would she like to meet a lawyer? Yes, so the lawyer came along and they had a chat. Would she like to see the law in action? So we went down to the local court and so on. And she had the right to say no of any of those offerings from me. As always, I can say, here's a mode of learning that you might want to use. And she may have said no if she wanted to. That was her choice. But what she did over those 2 years was that kind of habit change. She changed the whole way in which she thought and worked and recognized her qualities so that she could actually end up producing a graphic novel. So we have loads of structures, but my analogy is with a glass. That what is the value of a glass? Well, it's a rigid, empty, transparent, resilient structure. That is, the advantage of a glass is you can put water or beer or milk into it. It's only useful because it's empty. This is a Taoist notion, that usefulness comes from nothingness. That it wasn't the person who invented the wheel who was important, it was the person who invented the hole, because once you put a hole in a wheel, you can have an axle and make ox carts or whatever. So usefulness comes from nothingness. I'm sitting in an office here and it's only useful because it's got 4 walls and nothing in it apart from my equipment. It's transparent, you can see what's in it, and it's resilient, it will stand up to changes. So we have structures, and I just want to quickly mention those structures because we think they're rather important in the way that we like to work, but again, other people have other structures. For a start, we sort of think about each person, and then we have a notion of that they belong in a group, and I'll explain that in a minute, and then there's the whole community. So there's kind of 3 levels. And you could map it that way, that the person locates themselves within a learning group, as we call it, and within the community. Here's an example of a community meeting of nothing to do with our college, but and within another context where we were working. And you will see adults sitting along with young people and someone in a wheelchair, because it's all about inclusion. So a learning community is one which we think is the important baseline of the way we work. But we have, and it came up in the previous discussion, certain non-negotiables. So we say it's not negotiable that we have a community. We then can negotiate within it about things like rules. So the rules are negotiated, and when they're agreed, and we revisit them in the community every term, because there's new people in the term. So therefore, although the old stages, oh, it's boring because we're all happy, but no, there's new people. We recreate the community each term. And once they become then temporarily non-negotiable, they're written on a flip chart, put on the wall, everybody signs it. And then people are empowered to do what they like within those rules. So if it's not forbidden, it's allowed. And that is really rather important. And we only have about 3 or 4 rules usually. And they're not really rules, they're more principles of ways of working. So we have a structure about asking people to plan their learning, but again, it's an empty structure. We ask them these questions about what have been their experience, how they see themselves now, where they want to go in life, how they'll get there, and how they'll arrive at the place they want to get to. There's a lot more I could say about that, but it's just, I'm just giving it as an example of a structure that helps people. And then we have these, what we call learning groups, which are by age, because the community meets every morning, but the groups are the 9, 10-year-olds will be in a group because they have different issues from the 15, 16-year-olds who have to think about college entrance and public exams, whereas the 9, 10-year-olds don't. The learning groups meet only for about 45 minutes a week on one day, usually on a Friday. And they're there for people to talk through what they want to learn and to get support and challenge, being questioned. And it's a dialogic kind of place which encourages personal responsibility within each group. And that they can be face-to-face, but also they are also online. So in the COVID thing, what's been great is that the community proved itself as a community, because when it was middle of March, we went into lockdown and everybody was at home. So our students, we had 3 Zoom channels, and what was interesting is, for instance, the community were able to operate online. It was 1 o'clock every day, there'd be a community meeting. So normally it would be 9 in the morning when people arrived, but it was more convenient to do it in the middle of the day. That worked fine, but only because people knew each other and had felt some bonding within the community. And these learning groups could meet online once a week, because that is the place which individuals plan their learning and plan the things they want to do and the activities they want to undertake, and they get support for that within a peer group. And it's really fitting what is a kind of a motto, I suppose, of what about a community should be a place where people feel together and think separately, not think together and feel separately. Schooling is about thinking together. You are supposed to think the same way as the teacher so that you pass your exams. If you have feelings, they are called pastoral things and you belong somewhere else, or you go to mental health, or you go and see a psychiatrist or a therapist or whatever, because feelings belong somewhere else. And for us, community is about feeling together, being a sense of connectedness and caring about each other, so that we were able to think separately within that. So I'll skip that because and show you a piece about a school, which if I can get it to work. This was a program we've been running in schools, just as an example of how we don't neglect people in schools just because they're not with us. And so we worked in 2 schools in East Sussex. On the screen there is Will, who was 12-year-old, I guess. He was one of the students who was in a group that I was working with. And so you'll see that. And Will was someone who wanted to be a film director, he thought. And so we attached him to the people who made this film. By the way, this is a film of, it's only 5 minutes, 54 seconds. The full version is about 19 minutes and it's available on YouTube. And I can give people that full version, which has all the adults talking, but I just think it's quite interesting to get the bits with mainly young people and some of us adults on it. The film shows some differences in about the way we work within a school. For instance, one of the girls said we only had an opportunity to work with them for an hour or so every 3 weeks over 2 terms. And yet for many of these young people, they saw it as a life-changing experience. That there was issues of confidentiality, which one of the boys mentioned, which is important. We said, unless there is a kind of legal issue, we will not say anything about what goes on in the group, in the school. Will talks about how group is informal and formal, because it was like we create ground rules for the group. So therefore there was a bit about, for him, that was a formality, but the informality was, it's not like a classroom, you can say what you like, so long as you stick to the rules that the group has agreed. There's some other bits which are interesting, I think, in terms of a girl called Lauren who would like to be a netball coach, but never bothered to talk to a netball coach. So with the support of her group, they worked out things that she could go and ask a netball coach. And there's a boy called John in another group, which was with my colleague, Gillian Trott. And it was a group where the children were chosen as low performing, not getting on well and needing help. So that was the reason they were put into that group by the school. And that was about, he wants to be an author. So we'll invite an author in, but we don't let the author lecture us. It's about the young people asking the questions, because whoever asks the questions is in charge generally in a communication. So it's empowering the students by saying, whenever we invite someone into a group, we say, we don't want you to come and lecture. You come and sit there and the young people will ask you the questions, because they'll ask you for the things that they want to learn, not necessarily what you want to tell them. So I'll see if I can make it work, and then we'll see how we go.
Yeah, you should get talked at rather than
people actually listen to you.
It's just being able to say what you want and being actually asked about what you want to learn rather than being told what they think you should learn.
Within our curriculum, you don't really get a chance where you just get to sit down and talk about yourself and to hear what others are doing.
It was good because we got like a chance for everyone to give their input to you to help you.
From one person looking at a problem or a situation, they might not be able to see the easiest solution, and with just someone else's input into it, you can have a different frame of mind.
It helped me think about my future a lot more. You definitely start to think outside of school.
You have a facilitator within your group. There was like one sort of per 6 of us, and he got to know us over the few months.
We used to meet, I think, once every 3 weeks, and we'd spend an hour in form time, and then part of our next lesson, and it would be us getting together and discussing in groups our main aims for the future and that kind of thing.
Right, so the first thing to do was for you to, Will, to talk about your experience.
I've talked about a few things. I think rugby, because I've been doing quite a lot of rugby, and I said that was one of my goals, to be better at rugby. But I think to do with films is probably the biggest one that I've put forwards. I did enjoy the day, and I learnt quite a lot about all of the technical stuff, like special lenses.
There's a secrecy rule that we weren't allowed to say each other's goals and things outside of the group. It's good because it doesn't stop you from saying kind of personal things that you feel it's all tightly and close.
You have to abide by the rules, or otherwise it just doesn't work. It's informal.
What, on a Thursday afternoon?
But you have to be quite formal in the way that you act.
Would it be helpful to have James reading back those questions to you, Lauren, so you can think about what's been covered so far?
What university did you go to and why? What courses did you take?
How do you get into coaching? What was your career path?
Thank you, James. That's great.
What courses did you take?
I did in my degree, I did geography and sports science as a combined degree.
How did you get into coaching?
Okay, well originally it's obviously through teaching, and then with my love for netball and my enthusiasm for netball.
Did you manage to get to talk to Miss
Yeah, I
Shipley
did.
at all?
She started coaching outside of school for Howsham.
Now we've got to decide what questions we're going to ask Jane Hissey this afternoon.
How do you plan out?
That'd be quite an important one.
Maybe that could be the last question. She can sort of show you the sort of things that she does.
Yeah, it's quite tricky to know what the best way is. We have to be very careful thinking about what needs to be asked at the beginning and what needs to be asked at the end. What are your thoughts about that?
What we could do is we could let her do her main talk first, and then any questions that she hasn't said or if anything she hasn't explained after, we could always ask her.
Hello, James, Sean, Caroline, and Lauren.
Right, and I'm John.
Is it alright if we go around asking questions?
What is it like being an author?
Well, it's great fun at times. It can be quite lonely, especially if you're stuck for ideas and you're working in a bit of a vacuum. And then the next stage is this stage. See if you can tell me what this is.
Does everyone have their agendas?
I think we started off, it's quite awkward because it's quite hard to talk about yourself for a long time.
I had serious doubts at the beginning.
Yeah, me too. I was just sort of like, is this just a big waste of time?
Yeah.
£115 left. I think once you got into it more and you looked back on it, you realised how
I
much
think
it did
I
help.
definitely benefited from it.
Yeah, a lot.
Before I started the learning group, I was kind of burying my head in the sand and just assumed that, well, I didn't really plan ahead and I didn't think about what universities I was going to go to. Joining the learning group sort of helped me to plan my future, really.
Through doing this, I think it made me take a step back and look at what was important to me and how
I manage your time
how I
and
could
stuff.
better organise my time and do everything to the best of my abilities, because I am a very disorganised person, full stop.
Generally, if there's something that I don't really want to learn about, I don't pay attention and I'll just muck around. I work a lot better with the things that I want to do.
It's interesting to hear what other people want to do with their lives, and it's useful to get their input on your plans.
I think it's the best thing in school, really.
I have learned better sort of look back and things. It's not worth getting really stressed your time to things you really need to
and things you really want to,
and also have time to enjoy
things
yourself.
you ought to.
Because at the end of the day, we are 16.
Yes.
Sorry, let me get out of this. Stop share. Okay.
Interactive storytelling. I'll switch whenever I feel like it. What is interactive storytelling? Best flight ever.
What the heck is that?
Anybody has any idea what I mean by this?
Sorry,
What
I need to.
your vision is of interactive storytelling.
Sorry, let me go back into this. Don't quite know what happened there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, I'm done, I think. I've got a final slide which has got contact information, but otherwise it's throwing it open to you. It's been a quick run over a whole range of things, but I wanted to try and say why I think we need a new educational paradigm and where we fit within it. Over to the group.
Ian, can you repeat what you said about feeling together and thinking separately? I missed it.
Okay. It comes from Bishop William Temple, if you want to look up the reference. I think that for me, that as I talked earlier about company and breaking bread together, that sense of feeling together, or our dance company, how you connect. And although our students often talk about learning social ability or something like that, it's not a skill thing. It's more about relationships, which is not merely a skill issue. It's about how we relate to others and connect and feel a kind of oneness with others, if you like. I remember time in Jamaica with the Rastafarian who talk about I and I. In other words, if we say you and me, we're disconnected because there's a you and there's a me and we're two, as opposed to the notion of I and I, we are one. So there's something about how one creates that. And I don't think it's created artificially. I think it has to come from struggling with that and coming out the other side, so to speak, but always continuing the struggle. You know, it's not about suddenly having the perfect formula. So, and then the thinking separately is for me rather crucial. Whereas I do think in school, there is an expectation of feeling together. There is an expectation of thinking together, because of that notion of passing exams that are dictated by other people. When we've done, we run a self-managed learning master's degree, but what we did in that was people answered those 5 questions and created their own criteria for assessment, so that, and which included this notion of, well, what does mastery mean to get a master's degree? And that meant everybody thought differently about what those criteria meant for that person. And so by having 30 people on a program, there were 30 separate assessment processes because they're all different. The only program I enjoyed doing, I guess, was my doctorate, because I could think about what I wanted and it was accepted within university that you did. But I made certain we formed a learning group of others of us who were doing higher degrees, so that we could support each other about, well, the ways in which we struggled with doing research and connected. So to some extent, you know, we could all say, well, it isn't really my PhD, it's our PhD, if you like, at the end of it. I don't know whether that makes sense. So Vera, if you spot anybody who's got their hand up or wants to say anything, I'll stop the share.
Yeah, I
have.
Yes, Bruno, we've got a lot of questions. Bruno, you
Yes.
can go first. Yes.
Hi. Wonderful to listen to you one more time. And I have a question a bit more related to the research point of view of your work. You've been describing a lot the situation of the conventional or traditional schooling, right? And you are proposing your new paradigm. But have you found on your research some connection or reasons why the mainstream system embraces those values that you have described in the traditional one? Or, I mean, that's a really deep question, but
yeah, I think it's, well, there's some fairly obvious things about the nature of power, and I've tried in the last chapter of my book to talk about that politicians are different, because I've had to work with politicians a lot in the past, including people at the highest level in British politics, and it's always takes my breath away when I realise that the only thing that interests the people who are really successful in politics is power, and the media. So to give a good example, we were working with the government was setting up an outfit called Learn Direct in the early days of online learning, and we had come up with the idea of one which you could have people design their own programs, and we were working with the then education department, and we got a message not from them but from Tony Blair, the then Prime Minister's office, saying you can't do anything that would get into a newspaper called the Daily Mail, which is the biggest readership and is a right-wing newspaper in Britain, and it was like a direct message from the top, from the Prime Minister's office, not from the education department, that there mustn't be anything that goes into the press which makes anything look a bit radical or different. because obviously the interests of politicians were to be re-elected. At the moment, all the media in the UK, including left-wing, supposedly left-wing media, supports the current structure because these are people who've come through it, because the journalists themselves have by and large, education journalists have usually not had any experience of education, or if they have, it's been in the traditional system, and they have a kind of vested interest in propping it up. And there is quite a strong right-wing group in the UK that meets privately, that I found out about, and they troll people who step out of line, and they're dedicated to the current model and even more traditional models. And their heroine is a woman who runs a school in North London, which is incredibly controlled. The children aren't allowed to speak when they're moving from classrooms. They have to move at the right time. They have to have perfect uniform. Every minute of their day is controlled, and this is the kind of heroine. And of course, they get good results in exams. But what it's doing for future life of people, and what they're likely to what's likely to occur in later life, for that kind of appalling, way of treating young people, they don't think about, because all the research about education that I come across is about how to make teaching better, how to make classrooms better. So again, academics have a vested interest in this. And I mean, a good example was of when I talked about the difference between habit change and knowledge, that we did a program with head teachers of schools that were trying to be more radical. And so there were 6 of them in a group, because that's the way we work. And at the end of the program, they had made amazing changes in their schools. And it was thought, because it was through the university, the University of London, that we were doing this, that it would be important to have a seminar with professors of education and other people. So these heads were explaining things like they'd had the courage to make changes in the school, that they'd seen the value of empowering young people, all sorts of things that they'd done. And that in the group had been crucial to supporting them. This is the thinking together, that they'd realized that they weren't alone in this, that they had comrades who were supporting them. And after these presentations from the participants, one of the professor of education said, "This is not education, it's therapy. It doesn't count." And that's the kind of thinking that we have to deal with. That unless it's an additive model, because they have a vested interest in lecturing to people, in telling them things. These are people who were experienced heads, who had been on courses and been told things, and still change hadn't occurred. They got the change through them learning to work together and support each other. But for the professors of education, who were chosen as kind of liberal-minded professors, this is therapy, it doesn't count. That's your answer to what is a long, long piece.
Thank you very much.
D.
Well, I have.
It's your turn.
Sorry, D?
Yes.
Okay. I just had a very kind of practical question for you with your school. How do you manage the child protection aspect when you have adult learners with children? Just because I know that would be an issue where I am.
Sorry, how do you mean? I mean, the college is for 9 to 16-year-olds. And then, of course, there are adults with the young people. But within the community, all the adults have to go through a formal test, a government test. So we all have to be checked with the police, etc. That we don't have any criminal, not just convictions. I think it's even if you've stepped out of line criminally. So we're all checked. So the programs we run with adults are done separately from the programs we work with young people.
Oh,
so
okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So
the
stuff we do in organizations is we go into organizations and run these groups, and we run them in the same way as we work with young people.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry for the confusion. Apologies.
Naveen, now your turn.
Can I?
Yeah. Naveen?
Hello.
Hello.
Ian, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Talking about learning as a lifelong process, how do you feel about school degrees and university entrance exams? Like if the world accepts the new educational paradigm, what use is a school degree? And shouldn't all lectures of public universities be open to anyone who's interested instead of just enrolled people?
Yeah, well, we have a free university in Brighton, which does just that. It's free, there's no fees, and a lot of the people working in universities run courses for free through the free university. Somebody has proposed, and I thought it was great, is that why couldn't anybody just go to Oxford or Cambridge University and sit the final exams and then have a degree from Oxford or Cambridge, even though they never attended? Now, of course, Oxford and Cambridge would argue there's a lot about the attendance and the tutor system and residence and things like that. But so there are people who, and of course there are employers now who are not bothering about degrees. So you've got companies like Google and Apple and people like this who are saying we will recruit the best people and we won't consider whether they've got degrees or not. But that's not got through to the educational world yet, and our educational world is hiding it, of course, because this puts people's jobs at risk, doesn't it? And academics are not ones to accept that. But some of the academics are rebelling. There's a really good book by an economist who explains that there's nothing really in an economics degree of any use to anybody, and that what they do is the equivalent of what happened in Eastern Europe under communism. In other words, we pretend to teach and the students pretend to learn.
Thank you. Let's take Monica's question. Monica. Monica, you there?
Hi, sorry. Hi, sorry. I'd like you to talk a little bit about more specifically, like what would a 10-year-old attending SML College do in a typical day?
Okay, I don't, as you might expect, I'm going to say there's no typical day, but what happens is that we open the doors at 8:30 and there's a community meeting at 9. The community meeting is chaired in rotation, so it could be a 9-year-old or a 16-year-old chairing, because what this does is to stop power moving to one individual. If you have the same person chairing, that increases the power to that person within the community. And it's great, the way for people to learn to chair a meeting, which is just do it. And they don't have to. If anybody who's on the rota decides that day they don't feel like it, they don't do it. The community meeting can last 10 minutes if it's just giving information and people sorting out what to do that day. It might be planning a trip. It might be agreeing. We have a joint resources committee. So we have 6 learning groups. There's 36 students and 6 in a group. And they send a representative to a joint resources committee, which works out how to spend the budget. So for instance, the group, we had a cleaning budget that was quite large. This was moving into the new building. We went 3 years ago. So 3 years ago, when we moved into the new building, the Joint Resources Committee agreed that we take money out of the cleaning budget and put it into the kitchen so everyone could have free food and drink, but that everyone would agree to clean at the end of the day. So we finish at about 12:30, 12:45 for people to clean before we finish with a small community meeting at the end, which is a kind of ritual of everybody come together before they go home. So we're a morning only facility. In terms of attendance, that keeps us from being registered with the school. So in the morning, people would, if they've got a learning group, they would go to that. There may be things happening. People might be talking about what they've got on offer. Just as an interesting example of how we educate teachers when they come to us. We had a person who was a really nice guy, very liberal teacher, biologist, and early on in the community meeting, he'd said, I've got an arrangement to see Sarah at 10, and we're going to talk about evolution. And then I've got an arrangement to see John at 11 about something else. But he said, I just think evolution is a really important theory. So how about you, John, joining with Sarah? And John said, no, I've got a book booked at 11. That's what we're going to do. And he quickly learned, and this is the way that people learn when they come into the staff, that they learn from the students. The students go within the structure. I've booked you for 11 to talk about what I want to talk about. Yes, of course, evolution is important, but I don't want to do it. So that would be an interaction that might occur within a community meeting. People come wander around the building, so they may, somebody may be in the music room, somebody may be in the art room doing art. We have half the building is a noisy end and the other half a quiet end. So we have a room that when we moved in, the youngest students named the rooms, which I just thought would be a good idea for the 9-10-year-olds to name the rooms. So there's a room called Bob. We don't know why it's called Bob, but that's a room with where someone can go and have a sleep if they're tired, or other people can science equipment. We have a kind of quite high powered computing stuff, because a lot of our students do kind of high level game making with whizzy software. We have a very good IT guy, so they can wander around and do what they want, and then they finish at just before 1, and then but then they'll be often going off together, doing things together in the afternoons or in the evenings or meetings. So yeah, it just be whatever anybody wants to do during the morning. That's pretty quick. I don't know whether you'd like more information, Monica. Or...
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. Srinivas Kumar Yarrapottu, your turn.
Thank you, Veda. And Ian, I would like to salute you for the wonderful work that you have been doing. And if we had all present physically, we should have given you a standing ovation. Great work that you've done. And from your experience and observations, especially with artificial intelligence and so many other things to happen, what do you see as the future of education and learning?
Well, we have I had somebody I worked with. When she was a pro vice chancellor, which is the second level in the university, I was her coach, mentor, and then when she left and she took a chair in education and learner-centered design, and I got her on the governors, and then she said she's a bit too busy, so we made her the president, and she did a president's lecture on the future of AI. She's someone who's a world-renowned expert on this, and her point is that, of course, AI can replace the standard knowledge stuff. What it doesn't replace is things like the social intelligence. Computers can be linked together, but they're not socially intelligent as we are. And so there are, one of the interests is the different kinds of intelligence. Some of you will know of Gardner's work, 8 different kinds of intelligences. So, I mean, she's really picking up on that and saying that where we come in as humans is on the creative side, on the human side, which computers will never be able to replace, but they will replace a lot of the standard stuff that now is taught in the classroom. I mean, she's convinced of that, and she has been developing. She developed a kind of a online teacher package that learns from what the students want. It's not a standard stuff. It's about how the AI responds to the students they're working with. That's the kind of thing that she's interested in. But all the time saying that how the interaction between humans and machines is going to become more and more dominant and more sophisticated and more challenging to the traditional education system. But there's a lot more we could say on that. She's written a whole book about it. I can recommend it. She's called Rose Luckin, Professor Rose Luckin, and it's and she's Professor
Rose Luckin, is it?
Luckin, Rose Luckin. I think it's called Machine Learning and Human Intelligence. It was out about 2 years ago. In the list of the top 20 educational influence peoples in the UK, she's one of that top 20. Yeah, so she's kind of a big shot, which helps a lot.
Ian, some of the participants are asking about your book. I think you can put down the details of your book as well.
Yeah, should I go back onto screen share?
Let's take Yakov Hedge. Hi, Yakov.
Hi.
Yes. Okay. Well,
your turn now.
Can I just put that up then? Can people see that? Is that okay, Veda, that people can see that?
Yeah, sure.
So, Yakov, yeah, please.
I am.
Hi.
It was great to hear you again. I have a continual question to Kamal. First, I want to ask you how you see the last 20 years. If you look from your eyes, we met, I think, a little bit more than 20 years from now.
1999.
And when you look back about these 20 years, you see direction, you see positive things, negative things, and then I will go to the future, but not about maybe we will focus how you see the future of your college in the next 10 years. And later, okay, that's the two questions now.
Yeah, I think in England, things have got worse in the last 20 years. But I think one of the ways in which change occurs is when things get so bad that the system falls apart. So I think that the potential in England, and I'm saying England specifically because Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland are a bit different, it's become so repressive, and that I think that, if I can do a digression, Colin Powell, who was black general in the United States, who was once level being tipped as a future president, and in his autobiography, he was in the Vietnam War, and he said that we in Vietnam War on the front line knew that we were losing the war, but all the messages going back to Washington we were winning, and that all the measures of like body count and things that were used in Washington were that we're winning the war, but everybody down on the front line knew they were losing. And I think that's starting to happen in schools in England now, that there are people on the front line knowing that we're losing this, that there is so much oppression, there's so much disadvantage, increased poverty that is being created by the education system. The class bias is horrendous in the UK. But in other parts of the world, it's getting better. And I think that there's a divergence. I think Western Europe in general isn't so good, although Nordic countries are better. I've done all the work in Finland, and they have positive features and negative. But I think that the interesting things are happening elsewhere in the world, in South America, in Asia. So I think there's a divergence, and I think that change may occur differently in different countries. I mean, in Israel, obviously, you've been getting change through a different context and a situation which you've created to be more favourable. I think that in the UK, all the political parties are, well, actually, the paradox is when we had some problems with our local council, it was the Conservatives who supported us, and the Greens and Labour would like to close us down, because that sort of Stalinist way of thinking that is part of the Labour Party and the Green Party means that you should not be allowed to be outside the state system, and not a school, because we're not a school. We've managed to get registered. We've been inspected by Ofsted, which is the government inspectors, and they have agreed we're not a school. So we're unique, and we've got a letter from the Department of Education saying we're not a school, which is wonderful. So I think we're the first registered non-school in the country, which means we can do anything we like because we're not a school. For the future, we're looking at setting up another college in another part of the country, because I just had an email today from literally before I came on, from a mother saying, son's been transformed coming to us, and they talk to friends in other parts of the country and saying they're nowhere like ours. And so we are looking at setting up another school somewhere else. We're looking at getting back into schools, which we've stopped doing, so that we can at least show a model. We are looking at post-16, starting that. We're looking at doing summer schools for people in school, so because they are neglected in terms of thinking about their lives and their careers. And so we want to offer to people who may be in the school system, but can't get out of it, for various reasons, mainly parents are. I mean, and this is one of the problems, and it's been discussed in the earlier group today, that parents are nervous about doing something that's different. So we know that parents have to be quite tough in dealing with their own family pressures to do what is a safe assumption, the safe assumption of school. So what we want to do is to say, when the whole system collapses, we've got to have models that show that it can work, and we would be one of those models, along with Summerhill and Sands, and in other words, there are people within the UK who are doing a great job within this new paradigm I'm talking about. But the problem is, and I think came up in one of the other discussions, I think Helen's, that incommensurability, which is what Thomas Kuhn talks about, is the problem is that the language is all wrong. That when the way we talk about things doesn't make any sense. I wrote a piece, anyone's welcome to, saying about quantum theory and self-managed learning, that a professor of physics said there's two problems with quantum theory. One is it makes no sense, and two, it accounts for all the available evidence. And we're in the same position. We make no sense to people, but all the research, literally all the research, supports what we're doing, and there's no research which supports what the schools are doing, but it doesn't make any sense to people. And I think that's a real difficulty. But we are planning to do more stuff. And then we're looking at post-18. Way back, I talked to Tagaki about Japan, and could we link with Tokyo Shure or some of the Americans like Goddard for post-18, because I've run a post-18 program in the UK. And apropos of earlier comments, we admitted anybody. There was no entry requirements, and we had a degree by independent study that people could do anything they liked. It was back in the 1970s.
But Ian, you're exactly in the point of what Thomas Kuhn writes in his book of the evolution of science. So it's not when a new evidence comes, the science change. It's like time. And I think we are now in a very exciting moment. We are in a moment of changing the paradigm. And exactly everything that we are talking is the symbol of the time of changing the paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely. So we must fortify ourselves. This is the whole thing about, if we're in, it can seem for many people that there's all this oppressive environment, and but it's like we have to stick with it. I don't know if you've read Taleb's book about having skin in the game. We have to have skin in the game. It is no use talking about it or people lecturing about things. We have to go and do it and take the risk, because the bigger risk is not to do it. If we don't do this, we are jeopardizing not just the children's future, but the planet's future, because of the way in which schools educates people to be non-ecological and to chop the world into bits and unsystemic. And because of that, we're not going to solve the planet's problems unless we change education, in my view, and therefore we have to stick with it. We've got an obligation as adults to young people.
Thank you.
Thank you. We shall move to Derry's question. Derry?
I wonder if I should, it's more a sort of meandering thought. It will end up with a question. But starting my thought, I'm not sure what the question's going to be, but it will probably emerge at the end, because my question, about feeling together.
Derry, please open your camera that we can see you.
Why?
He's probably sitting there naked.
Well, that's the amazing thing, of course. All you can see is the top part. You can't see any trousers on.
So beautiful.
No, well, here's the problem. Deb just served my supper, and I didn't want to make you jealous. She's such an amazing cook. You'll all fall about salidating, and you won't be able to think about it. No, but here's my meandering thought. One of my grandchildren, most of my grandchildren are musical, so perhaps there's a genetic thing there. But one of my grandchildren has grade 8 jazz saxophone, and she got a distinction in her last exam. And yet she and I together struggle to help her improvise, and yet jazz is improvisation. So how does somebody get grade 8 with distinction? It's the highest grade you can get on jazz sax when you're really rather afraid to improvise and are having to play around with your granddad in order to get the hang of it. And I was thinking about my music lesson. Ian asked me about this. When I was about 4, I found I could pick out tunes on the piano. And when I was about 9, I got sent for music lessons, and my teacher actually hit me on the knuckles for picking out Billy Cotton band tune, pop tunes on her posh Steinway piano. And so I didn't go to her lessons anymore, and I got entered for music festivals, for God's sake. And there's nothing more unfestive than putting 15 kids up, all who've got to play the same piece of Mozart, while poncy adults make critical comments about your musicianship. Nothing less festive in the world could ever be imagined than that. So I packed that in as well, and I stopped with music until I met a friend's dad who was a jazz guitarist, and he just encouraged me in my picking out of tunes on the piano. And people often say to me, jazz musicians, you know, you just sit down, 3 or 4 jazz musicians, and you start playing. You've got no music. You haven't rehearsed, and yet out of it, something happens. And it involves a slightly uncanny level of listening. If you play jazz and you play in groups and you play with people you've never played with before, especially if they're better than you kind of know what they're going to do before they do it, even though it's never been done before. And I love all music, and now I play in more formal musical organizations where you rehearse and you all listen to each other, yes, yes, yes. But I always come back to jazz, where there's this improvisation possibility, and it involves something, and I don't know quite what it is. I often get asked to teach improvisation by people who've had music lessons but can't improvise. People who say, I'd love to play jazz, but I just don't know where to start. I'm afraid to give it a try. I think there is a question coming, Ian. Here it comes. Can you learn to can you teach improvisation?
I think you can learn to. I'm not.
I didn't say that. I said, can you teach it?
I don't know that you can teach it in that sense. I think I enjoy improvising in dance, and I didn't want to show one of the longer pieces on the solo piece because I was also wanting to make the point about a company. But I've got in the piece that we're doing at the moment, I've got a 2-minute 40-second solo, which is in jazz. I mean, in dance, that's quite demanding. But I think what I found in dance, and I don't know that it's not necessarily related to jazz, is a notion of a score, which is a kind of a shape to something. So I'm back to my notions of structure. So in jazz, there is a structure, isn't there? I mean, you know, there's a start and a finish kind of thing. I mean, I know, okay, there's free jazz, but I mean, the jazz I like is where you start with a melody, then it goes off, and then you come back to the melody, kind of, and therefore there is a structure to it. And I think that when people know that, and that same in dance, that if so, I get from our artistic director, choreographer, will say, well, what this has got to be like is like this, you know. So it's a piece I'm doing with the notion of being pushed and moved by an invisible force, and so what I've noticed is where we've been with different choreographers trying to encourage that kind of improvisation is that I don't tend to need a score, but some people do. But the score is only a structure sort of saying, you know, move in a certain way. I don't know whether musically there's an interesting example, which was way back, it was on television, of a guy explaining conducting an orchestra. And what he did was to do 2 different things. He said to the musicians, who were all very good, it was a proper, you know, classical orchestra, I want all the violins to be playing at the same time, the bow moving at the same time, you know, and everybody alongside everybody else. And then he did something different, which was he explained the sort of feeling that he was trying to get over and saying, play with that feeling. And there was a difference, you know, obviously it was, the improvement was in his instruction about what the composer was trying to get over and getting people to think. So I do think there is something about, I think as adults we can help young people in that way, but I can help people with dance, but partly because I think I can help, I get people to move. So I often teach a bit of Tai Chi and people do that. And then I say, do your own Tai Chi, and then suddenly they're dancing. And it's kind of a bit subversive. So I get people to dance. I've done it with, I remember doing things at the Civil Service College with senior civil servants, sort of, they wanted to know about relaxation and stress. So I said, all right, we'll do some Tai Chi. And then I said, just do your own Tai Chi, go from that with that same feeling. And then they were all dancing in their suits. And, you know. So I don't know.
Can I have one comment on Derry's question? I think the question was, can you teach improvisation? It would be the same thing as, can you teach innovation? And I think what I'm hearing for the last 2 weeks is when we have different understandings of what it means to teach. There's a dominant view that I've heard for 2 weeks here that teaching is delivering information. So certainly we cannot deliver information to anyone on how to be innovative. But if teaching, we can't, we can only deliver knowledge we already know, facts and information. But if teaching means to create environments that facilitate and are designed to nurture a particular human capacity, to me, that's what teaching is. So I believe my answer to that is yes. That if it is what we set ourselves out to do, which is to create environments that help each of us grow in our capacities to do new things with new things and have new thoughts, yes, we can do that. And I also believe another thing, just while I have the air, is that there's a reluctance about the word assessment here. I don't know why that is, but would we know innovation when we looked for it? And could we say that person has done something there? So I don't know. So the other thing is that I think the shifting paradigm for me is that we are shifting in our paradigm, our view of what it means to be educated. So, many of us grew up in a world where to be educated meant to have the big book and to be tested on that big book, and to be educated meant to be, quote, knowledgeable. And the shift now is that we know that to survive as a species and as a world together, that is not the thing that's going to help us thrive or even exist. I think we know that it is our ability to be innovative, to be explorers, to be inquirers, to be questioners. So I believe that educational institutions are putting those capacities up front into what it is we're trying to achieve, after all, when we're teaching, or if we have any kind of institution. And I think when we put these things up front, it changes how we organize what classrooms look like. It changes how we organize schools. But I think that's the shifting paradigm. So many people who were never, like many of us here, I wouldn't even read the vocabulary list. It was just my resistance as a human being, to be, quote, obedient in that way. But if schools had some other idea, which is where it's our ability to connect, share, to build on ideas from other people, to come up with a collective understanding of how something works, yeah, I think we'd thrive there. But so I think that that's the shifting educational paradigm. And the only reason I am a friend of industry right now, which I'm not, because they have shifted that paradigm. It's the one moment we could seize this moment because of AI, because business for so long has shaped the structure of schools as to being a content knowledge-based. now business for corporate reasons and because they want a workforce, now they want us to be innovative. Well, so be it. I'm a pragmatic. Seize the moment and let us all be innovative. And I think we'll blow it away. But so yes, Derry. I think that our job as teachers is to nurture the capacity for improvisation. Yeah.
I'm happy with your characterization. I just don't use the word teach, mainly because the students who come to us have rebelled against teaching. They've had a bad time being taught. But I agree, and you mentioned assessment along the way. We're very keen on that, but it's about self-assessment, because unless individuals can self-assess and then bounce that off other people, so like the master's degree, people did a self-assessment to get their degree, but then they had to convince the other 5 in their group that their self-assessment was reasonable. In other words, it can't be just down to individuals to decide. And I think that in terms of that wider view of education, there is that kind of, I'd add the sort of moral dimension, you know, that, for instance, we had a doctor in the UK, dead now, called Dr. Shipman, who killed around 250 of his patients, the worst serial killer ever. And he was a skilled doctor, but somewhere along the line, his desire to control others meant that he ended up killing nearly 250 people. And that was a disgrace that he was able to practice that. And so it can't be down to the individual. It has to be a collective, which is back to community, but it has to be within a trusting context. You know, I'm not going to trust myself with other people unless I can trust them, you know, so that we are the 5th question in our 5 questions. How will you know you've arrived at where you want to get to? You have to include measures and criteria of assessment, and that assessment is important. And schools and universities do it really badly. Our master's degree, when a person had written what we call a learning contract, they had to do it 100%. When I got my master's degree, all I had to pass was 40%. In other words, we were the most rigorous master's degree in existence, because we were the only one who said, if you haven't got 100%, you have to come back and have another go with your group until you get 100% acceptance. So the educational system actually fails in its own criteria. You know, I got a degree in chemistry by only learning about half the syllabus, because I didn't like the other half of the syllabus, but I knew how to spot questions and play the game. It's a joke, you know. I think we're needing time, aren't we?
Ian, we'll take last 2 questions from Geeta and Dilipa. Geeta, you can pose your question. We've got Dilipa. Geeta, you are there? Geeta Lakshmi? We don't have a lot of time. Geeta Lakshmi, you there? Okay, let's go to Dilipa. Dilipa, you can ask your question.
Thanks for that.
We're not able to hear you. Your connection is not very... Ian, can you hear Dilipa?
No. Sorry.
Dilipa, we can't hear you.
I will type my question.
Dilipa, you can
I
write
will type my question.
Okay, you can write your question. Yeah. So just one question that we have on the chat box.
I'll type. Yeah.
So there is a question. Up. Yeah, there is a question by Linda. She wants you to answer. What's the question? Can you go up? Linda, you there? So Linda says, Ian, you say you have worked in many countries, including Sweden. Do you know of any schools or organizations who follow self-managed learning principles in Sweden? As school is compulsory there, it is difficult for some families that I know to find a good fit for their young people. Ian.
In Sweden, I worked with, in the city of Malmö some years ago, it was a program for the young people, I think they were over 16 anyway, who had failed in the system, and they wanted to have some sort of structure that would help work with over 16s. So it wasn't a school program, and I had been actually in the Skåne region doing some work with the local authorities on senior leadership development anyway, because they had read one of my books on self-managed learning, but found that it's not so easy to implement just from a book. So that's my only experience in Sweden was in Malmö, and it was I think it was post-16 program. But if you'd like to email me and I could tell you more about that, then you're very welcome. I think I put my email address up on the final sheet.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat as well, I think. And we take the last question for your session. Dilipa, she is asking, school is compulsory for children in the UK, right? If so, how is SML classified as a non-school by Ofsted? Do you understand what Ofsted is? I don't know.
Yeah, it's the government inspection scheme. Yes, we our local authority, when it was green controlled, phoned the government inspectors saying there was an illegal school, so they came and inspected us and agreed we were okay. And we've tried to get hold of the report, but they won't give it to us. And we think it's because it's a good report, and that would be embarrassing to both the inspector's system and also to the Department for Education, because neither of them will give us the copy of the report on us. Which is typical of the way in which the system works, of course. No, in the UK, ever since the 1944 Education Act, children must be in education, but that could be in school or otherwise. And the law does not say that school is preferable. So anything or otherwise is never defined in law. So although we have many thousands of home educating parents in the UK, probably about 90,000, because a lot are invisible to the authorities. And the Labour Party is typically trying to get that stopped by and large. I'm being crude, there's not all in the Labour Party like that. Whereas the Conservative Party, because they have this kind of libertarian right wing, tend to be supportive of anything that's not school. So that's the UK, that's the English situation.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for your session. We loved it. There are still a few questions, but I think you can write to us and we'll send it to Ian, or you can directly send it to Ian as well. I think he has put his email address in the chat box. Thank you, Ian, very much, and you are most welcome. You know, you should come to Nepal. We would love to have you here.
I hope to come the year after next. I'm down to come in 22.
Great. So before we move on to next session is by Mike Wyman from Germany. He's very precise about time, but we couldn't keep up with that. So Mike is going to, hold my neck, but we need 5 more minutes, Mike, before I make some announcements, and then we move on to the next session. So a few announcements. So friends, we have 27% of our expense and objectives, we've received that, and a lot of speakers, they have donated, and the community of 200 children and adults really need your support in these difficult times. So please, if you can, please do contribute to IDEC, because the received contribution will directly go to the community. And also on the November 5th, we have IDEC global meeting. Do not miss that, because important decisions and all your say about IDEC can really impact a lot. So do make your time free for that global meeting, because we'll have Yakov along with us as well. And after the meeting, we have auction that will be like whatever the articles that you donate to the IDEC, web IDEC, we'll auction it and raise some funds. So Jakov also will join us. He will be taking your questions about IDEC and the whole democratic education movement on that particular evening. So we welcome you all. Do make yourself free for that evening.
What time is that?
That will be exactly around this time. The whole evening, we have special day on that particular evening. We have a cultural show, a big mega cultural show, and then the meeting, and then auction, and Henry, and we'll talk about the Summerhill Festival. Jakov will take your questions directly on the democratic movement. So the whole evening, we have like 5 hours to 6 hours. We have a big evening coming up. So we'll keep you posted about that as well. So thank you. We'll come back shortly after like 3-4 minutes. Mike Wyman, you there?
Yes, I'm here, but
Can you give us,
I miss my host option.
Can you give us 3 minutes, Mike?
No problem. No problem at all.
Okay, we'll be back.
But can you give me the host option?
Yes, I'll give you in 2 minutes, okay?
Okay, fine.
Yeah.